Hello there, little masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, the good stuff is guaranteed to put some hair on your chest.
West Du Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Radagast to my Gandalf, Alan Sisto.
Oh, no. Thank you, Sean, but I believe I'm the Gandalf to your Radagast.
Well, you'd think so, but I'm younger than you, and Gandalf came last to Middle-earth, didn't he?
Yes, but Gandalf was in looks more aged, gray-haired, and gray-clad, and you know I'm more gray-haired than you. We don't want to have that argument. But I guess that's what I get for letting you put together this week's intro, a special hat with a built-in bird's nest.
There you go.
Not to mention all that pleasant stuff dripping down. Anyway, folks, tonight we begin Chapter 7 of The Hobbit, Queer Lodgings, in which we meet one of the most mysterious characters in all of Tolkien's legendarium. I'd kind of put him right up there with good old Tom B. I'm speaking, of course, of Beorn.
Oh, yeah, and we have gotten so many questions about Beorn since the start of Season 2. I wish we could say we had answers to all of them, and I'm not really sure we do. As Tolkien said in one of his letters, even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, and I have to add that Beorn is definitely one of them.
Oh, no doubt. We promise that over the next 2 episodes, though, we will give old Beorn the full Prancing Pony Podcast treatment. No, I didn't prepare my special effects tonight, folks. Sorry.
That's okay.
But we will answer as many questions.
We all just
about
hear
him.
it in our heads when you say it.
We do. We will answer as many questions about him as we can.
We certainly will, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, it's time for another installment of This Week in Tolkien History.
Indeed it is.
And Alan, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thank you, Sean. This episode is releasing on January 28th. This week in 1916, Tolkien was stationed at Brockton Camp in Staffordshire with the Lancashire Fusiliers. All 3 of his closest childhood friends, members of the TCBS, had already shipped out for the war. Our listeners who have read John Garth's work, or who listened to our interview with John Garth last year, you'll know all about the TCBS. If you missed that episode, you want to go back and listen. It's episode 44. On February 3rd, one of them, G.B. Smith, wrote a letter to Tolkien in which he said of Tolkien's work, "My dear John Ronald, publish by all means. I'm a wild and wholehearted admirer, and my chief consolation is that if I am scuppered tonight, I am off on duty in a few minutes, there will still be left a member of the great TCBS to voice what I dreamed and what we all agreed upon. May God bless you, my dear John Ronald, and may you say the things I have tried to say long after I am not there to say them, if such be my lot." Well, Smith was one of the 2 members of the TCBS who did not survive the war. But it certainly seems that his words left an impression on Tolkien. Without this letter, who knows if The Hobbit would ever have even seen the light of day.
I think you're absolutely right, and they are beautiful and poignant words, and some of my favorite ones to read.
I agree.
On another note, I have another. On this week in 1938, just a few months after the publication of The Hobbit, Tolkien wrote a letter of his own with a reference to another young admirer. On February 1st of that year, Tolkien wrote to C.A. Firth at his publisher, Allen & Unwin, and he asked Mr. Firth to ask Mr. Unwin whether his son, a very reliable critic, and this would of course be young Rayner Unwin, the one who used to review children's books for his father at the rate of 1 shilling per review. And those of you who heard our episode, I think it was 53, when we started talking about The Hobbit, Rayner actually was the one who gave The Hobbit the green light for publication at the age of 10.
Yeah, suitable for 8 and 9-year-olds.
That's right, suitable for up to 8 or 9-year-olds, yeah. So Rayner at this point was now 12, and so Tolkien was asking if he would care to read the first chapter of the sequel to The Hobbit. I have typed it. I have no confidence in it, but if he thought it a promising beginning, could add it to the tale that is brewing. Now, Tolkien was actually already on the 4th draft of the first chapter of The Lord of the Rings, but the tale that was brewing there was very different from what it would become. And anybody who's interested in reading those early drafts can actually find them in The Return of the Shadow, which is the History of Middle-earth, Volume 6.
Quite different indeed. I think that's still the Trotter days, isn't it?
Yeah.
Along with all the other differences.
And,
but that was
and Bingo
one.
And Bungo and
Bingo
Odo
and Bungo.
And
Quite different indeed,
yes.
as I'm sure we will discuss when we get to The Lord of the Rings later this year. Oh, man.
We'll need something to digress on, so I'm sure we...
Boy, yeah, that's going to be fun. But for now, we've still got plenty of Hobbit to discuss, so let's get into it.
All right.
We're going to start with, well, it appears that Eriador Eagle Flight 105 is scheduled for an on-time departure from gate number 1. Bilbo just has to make sure he catches the shuttle.
Lots of leg room on those flights.
Lots of leg room. Yeah,
especially if you're in the Talon section.
Well, yeah,
if you're
it's
on
a
the
little
back
cold.
section, a little less.
Yeah, definitely cold though.
Yeah, bit of a draft. Lots of noise.
No food cart. No food cart. And I don't think it comes, even though it should, with the little tiny bottles of alcohol. I mean, really, if there's a flight that you need those tiny, I don't even drink. But if I'm on the back of an Eagle, I'm going to be looking for a tiny bottle of something.
You're going to be looking for the little pony bottles of booze. And
yeah, seriously.
Having a few of those before you get on the quote-unquote plane.
I'm going to be like B.A. Baracus, and you're going to have to give me some of that special milk. Knock me out.
Is that like our third A-Team reference?
It's at least our third
in
A-Team
3 episodes. I feel like we've been on a real string of A-Team references lately.
We have, but yeah.
That's amazing. I love it when a plan comes together.
Well played, sir. I see what you did there. Oh
man.
As long as you're smoking a cigar when you say it.
Right.
So, Bilbo gets up. We haven't even discussed a single word of the text yet, and we're already digressing.
Yep.
So he gets up, and, the first thing that he is really disappointed about is the lack of a proper breakfast. He wants it's the homey stuff. We talk about the comfort and all of that. So the first thing he wants is a wash and a brush, and then he wants a nice breakfast. Tea, toast, bacon, but he gets cold mutton and presumably cold rabbit.
That had been cooked on sticks the night before. Which
he would have rather had a loaf and butter.
Right.
Again, why not both? But here, I'll admit the idea of cold lamb and rabbit in the morning is that's not an appealing breakfast.
No, not at all.
I will admit that.
I will say he slept well enough to kind of have forgotten where he was.
Yeah.
When I'm sleeping in a strange place, first night in a hotel room or something, and that's in a hotel room, I'm waking up all the time, and, I wake up in the morning and I'm keenly aware of where I am because I didn't get any sleep. I will say he at least slept well enough to get a
wake
deep
up
sleep.
and be like, I got to put my kettle on.
Right,
oh, wait
exactly.
a minute.
I think I would have woken up scared several times because I'm sleeping in an eyrie.
Yeah, and I don't want to roll over and fall 8,000 feet to my death.
Off the side of a mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a little nerve-wracking. So this time, instead of being in the Talon section, which is probably like the standing room section on a Ryanair flight, he instead gets the spot on the Eagle's back, which is pretty close to first class.
That's business class for sure, yeah.
I'm thinking there are no airlines. I just read that the 747s have been retired from the last American-based airline.
Really?
Yeah, but they had that really cool hump,
the little upstairs,
towards the front with the upstairs. So
I never got to go up there, but I saw it.
I never. Are you kidding me? No. That's like
I imagined what it must be like many times.
That's all I ever did. I guess there's some other airlines still doing it, but no U.S.-based airlines have the 747s. Yeah, they just were doomed based on fuel economy and things. But
yeah.
So this is very much like that seat, right? This is up in the upper deck.
Yeah.
The
They've got the disco ball up there, and all you can drink single malt scotch, and
There you go. They're practically one steward or stewardess per passenger. It's a great ratio.
The nice reclining seats.
Oh yeah, with the beds and the TVs. Yeah, this is really this is still an Eagle, folks. It's still not a place that most of us are going to want to be.
And this is still a Tolkien podcast. So
this is still a Tolkien podcast. It's not an airplane podcast. It's not a breakfast podcast. Yeah. We probably shouldn't we?
I probably should let you read some Tolkien.
So let's do that. I'll read the next little bit here. The sun was still close to the eastern edge of things. The morning was cool, and mists were in the valleys and hollows, entwined here and there about the peaks and pinnacles of the hills. Bilbo opened an eye to peep and saw that the birds were already high up, and the world was far away, and the mountains were falling back behind them into the distance. He shut his eyes again and held on tighter. "Don't pinch," said his eagle. "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look rather like one. It is a fair morning with little wind. What is finer than flying?" Bilbo would have liked to say, "A warm bath and late breakfast on the lawn afterwards," but he thought it better to say nothing at all and to let go his clutch just a tiny bit. After a good while, the eagles must have seen the point they were making for, even from their great height, for they began to go down, circling round in great spirals. They did this for a long while, and at last the hobbit opened his eyes again. The earth was much nearer, and below them were trees that looked like oaks and elms, and wide grasslands, and a river running through it all. But cropping out of the ground, right in the path of the stream which looped itself about it, was a great rock, almost a hill of stone, like a last outpost of the distant mountains, or a huge piece cast miles into the plain by some giant among giants. Quickly now to the top of this rock, the eagles swooped one by one and set down their passengers. "Farewell," they cried, "wherever you fare, till your eyries receive you at the journey's end." That is the polite thing to say among eagles. "May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks," answered Gandalf, who knew the correct reply. And so they parted. And though the Lord of the Eagles became in after days the king of all birds, and wore a golden crown, and his 15 chieftains golden collars, made of the gold that the dwarves gave them, Bilbo never saw them again, except high and far off in the battle of 5 armies. But as that comes in at the end of this tale, we will say no more about it just now. Lots to unpack, isn't there?
Yeah, there is just a ton.
To unpack. Bilbo's still afraid. Even though he's got the better seat, his eyes are still closed. He wants nothing to do with this.
He does not want any part of heights at all.
No.
The eagle, what is finer than flying? Well,
yeah,
a good
just
many
about
things,
anything.
actually.
Yeah, but funny that you should ask. I've got a top 10 list here.
Yeah.
The only thing flying is finer than is falling.
Very true.
Pretty much.
True.
I'm sure that's Bilbo's opinion. But,
yeah.
a warm bath and late breakfast on the lawn does sound quite pleasant, doesn't it?
Sounds delightful, yeah. And I also notice it's something that is as close to the ground as possible.
Yes, that is quite true. He's not even standing up for it. It's not even a shower.
It's not even a shower and breakfast at a table. It's a bath and breakfast on the lawn.
On the lawn. That's right. He can't fall from either of those places.
Right. Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Another reference to Bilbo being like a rabbit.
You caught that one too. I know. I thought the same thing.
I think there are a few of these in this chapter,
and they're all kind of close together here, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Because we're going to get another one with Beorn later.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's in this episode or in the next one, but it's in this chapter. I think it's in the next episode, actually. I think it's more than halfway through.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But still, it's in this chapter, and folks will have read it presumably. Mm-hmm. We get a lovely landscape description again. I love this. I mean, the earth was nearer. Below them were trees that looked like oaks and elms. So now we're out of the mountain trees, right? We're not dealing with these coniferous evergreen trees.
Right, the larches and the pines and the firs.
The larches. Yeah, and the pines and the firs. We're now dealing with oaks and elms and these wide grasslands. And you can just see it. It's so vivid.
And this big river.
Beautiful. Okay. Yeah, the big river.
We've got to give a shout out to the River Anduin.
Yeah. It's not named. But it is this time the unnamed thing. We know what it is. We'll get to that in a little bit. But this time we know that the unnamed river is the Anduin.
Right.
But just a gorgeous description.
I know what you're referring to.
We'll get
the
to
unnamed thing that we chose to name last time. And
last time we named the unnamed Lord of the Eagles, and we'll get to that momentarily. We might have jumped the gun on that one a little bit. I love the politeness.
What do you make of this? What do you make of this description of the rock, the Carrack, being like a huge piece of rock cast miles into the plain by some giant among giants?
Well, I think certainly for somebody like Bilbo, for whom all of this is beyond his original scope of thinking. I mean, it's all fantastic to him. I don't mean fantastic in a good sense. I mean fantastic in the sense of
fantastical, something a thing of fantasy. Yeah.
Right. And of course, he saw the giants, or at least the evidence of the giants in the mountains not that long ago. About a week ago at this point. And for him, I'm sure he's imagining this almost as some, huge piece of rock, thrown out there by the giants. It's a foothill. It's a last outpost, like the text says, of the mountains. I don't think anything of that in terms of geography. I know that wasn't Professor Tolkien's strong suit in terms of his.
Well, knowing, and this is probably where knowing too much about the legendarium can actually make you start to see things where they're not there. Yeah. And I don't think there really is anything there. But
No.
what I love about this is that I remember that the Misty Mountains were actually raised by Melkor.
That's right. Yeah.
And you know, when you look at things like the Battle of the Powers, when the Valar are fighting and the earth is shaking beneath them, and
entire continents disappear at the end of the
You start to wonder if something like this could have been a result of one of those ancient battles that we read about in the Silmarillion, and we don't know. We'll never know whether it is or
true.
isn't.
Not so much by a giant among giants, but by one of the powers.
A Vala among Valar, or an Ainu among Ainur. And it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. But what I love about it is that this is a mythic world where these kinds of things are possible. And as you say, Bilbo sees it's a fantastical thing. Bilbo comes up with this fantastical explanation for it, and I think we as readers tend to do that as well. And I think that's really cool. I think Tolkien invites us to do that with.
It's a mythical world, and even the people in the world are making myths of the things that they see. That's a good point. I love the politeness of the eagles. Again, this is one of those things, we talked about the eagles being wild, just like the goblins and the wargs, and we'll be getting to Beorn and his wildness too. But the eagle's wildness doesn't exclude manners.
That's true. Yeah,
they do have.
They're very polite.
Sort of civilization, if you will, this sort of culture. They say farewell when people get off the eagles. It's sort of like the stewardess saying bye-bye now when you get off the plane. Maybe.
Except they're probably a bit more sincere about it.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of hoping. But, they've got this nice little saying, and I find it absolutely fascinating that Gandalf knows the answer.
Yeah. Well, I think that is pretty interesting, and it reminds me of a question from a listener that I think is going to come up in. I think we got it in this episode, don't we? About Gandalf being the kind of wizard who knows things. So a little teaser for what's coming later in the episode. But
stick around.
Those
of you who leave before the Barnum's Bag segment are missing out.
Stick around to the end. We got some fun stuff waiting for you this time, and always.
Every single time.
But especially this time. But
yeah.
One thing I really liked about Gandalf's response, Rateliff in History of the Hobbit had a really fascinating observation about the way this farewell fits into the cosmology of Arda. And he actually uses the phrase mythic resonance. It has a mythic resonance.
I love that. Yeah.
Which almost reminds me of what we were saying about the Carrick a moment ago. But going back to the History of Middle-earth, Volume 4, it's a book called The Shaping of Middle-earth. And a lot of the texts in that actually date to about this time when Tolkien was writing The Hobbit. And there's a text in there called the Ambarkanta, where Tolkien diagrams the layers of basically the cosmology of Arda, and he diagrams the atmosphere. And there's a layer of air in the atmosphere called Vista, or originally I think it was called Wilwa, where the birds fly. And then above that, there's like the place of light, the Ilmen, which is the place where the sun and the moon fly. I think if you're familiar with medieval cosmology at all, I think you'd probably be right if you consider like the Ilmen is like the ether and Vista is like the actual air.
Right.
And so this farewell saying, may the wind, may the wind carry you where the sun sails and the moon walks. It's actually a sort of a...
It references both of those.
It's like a benediction saying, may the wind carry you higher than you've ever flown, carry you up into this upper air where the celestial bodies fly.
Wow, man, that's cool.
I think that's
really
super cool.
That's deeper than I thought. My thought was real simple. It was just, clearly the eagles don't share. I mean, this is like an eagle's greeting. I mean, they're talking about eyries. They're talking about the wind and the wings. So clearly this is what an eagle would say to another eagle. So it makes the fact that Gandalf knows it pretty cool. I mean,
significant.
How do you know what eagles say to each other?
Right.
But I love what you pulled out there, what Rateliff had to say. That's really phenomenal. Well, not so much Rateliff. I mean, he references The Shaping of Middle-earth, and it's Tolkien himself who talks about that, but very cool. Yeah.
Well, and Rateliff even makes a statement about how this reminds us that the eagles are the servants of Manwë, because he even says that there's actually something in The Shaping of Middle-earth that says, from Vista, or Wilwa, it was originally called, there's no outlet or escape save for the servants of Manwë, or for such as he gives powers like to those of his people. So Ratliff's whole thought is that this really is a direct reference back to the fact that the eagles are eagles of Manwë, and this is sort of a wish for ascension beyond the realms that they usually fly in.
That
super
is
cool stuff.
That really is. Well, and I mean that makes sense because Manwë, he's sort of the Vala of the air, right? I mean, if we're looking at these elementals, right, Aule earth and Ulmo water and Manwë air. So this makes total sense. Man, that's so cool. And then,
I really like that.
I have to say, though, that the ending of the segment, I was thinking about just wrapping it up about, and so they parted, or even after the correct reply. But I love this last little bit because it's so very different from what we experienced throughout the Silmarillion, the part about how Bilbo never saw them again, but, except at the Battle of Five Armies, and that comes into the end of the tale. We'll say no more about it just now. How many times would we have, been
in
interested in that?
Yeah. Yeah.
If this was written in the style of the Silmarillion, Tolkien would have included a 2-sentence description of the battle and its results, after the death of Smaug, when Thorin was killed and buried with the Arkenstone and Orcrist. And he'd be like, you just ruined the whole story, man.
That is so true. That happens so many times in the Silmarillion.
It does. He never in the Silmarillion says, well, that comes in a few chapters, so we won't say anything more about it.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Well, we talked about how the Silmarillion was
style.
It was always, meant to be a description of stories that people already sort of knew. And
a history book. People reading stuff that was, already thousands of years old. But
Right, yeah.
I could just
hilarious to think of something like that happening here, though.
Yeah, it really is. Just he would totally ruin the story there in 2 lines.
While we're on the topic of the fate of the Lord of the Eagles, I probably should
let's go ahead
talk
and
a little bit
there.
about the error we made last time.
Yeah.
Last time we speculated, we were pretty sure of ourselves that the Lord of the Eagles was probably Gwaihir.
Right.
From Lord of the Rings. And it was just, given the proximity and time to Lord of the Rings.
Right, why not?
And we know Gwaihir is a descendant of Thorondor, who was, a great Lord of Eagles in his time. But there is a line in Return of the King in the chapter The Field of Cormallen that makes it clear that Gwaihir cannot be the Lord of the Eagles here.
Yeah.
In that chapter, Gandalf actually says to Gwaihir, he says, "Twice you have borne me, Gwaihir, my friend." But the 2 times he's referring to were very clearly events in Lord of the Rings. There's Gandalf's rescue from the top of Orthanc, and then there's later on when Gwaihir bore him to Lorien after his battle against the Balrog.
Right.
So
exactly.
2 times he was born, and we know those 2 times happened during the course of events in Lord of the Rings.
Therefore,
clearly this is not a time that Gwaihir bore Gandalf. So
therefore it's not Gwaihir.
We were fairly certain of it. Seemed like a reasonable assumption, but sadly, not the case.
Clearly not.
And we just, we wanted to point that out.
Probably Gwaihir's dad. Just guessing.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Just a thought.
I would hope so, because, otherwise it makes it even stranger to me that this guy and not Gwaihir would become the king of all birds later on, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
given
true.
Gwaihir's lineage, you would think that, he would be the king of all birds. But you're probably right. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's Gwaihir's dad, although maybe we just shouldn't speculate anymore.
Probably not. We kind of tend to screw up when we speculate. I mean, it's fun. Don't get me wrong.
No,
but
it's great. It's what we do. But every once in a while, we're a little bit off.
We are. So we had to issue that addendum.
Yeah.
So with that, I believe you have a passage. Gandalf starts to tell the dwarves what's going to happen next.
Their time is coming.
Yes.
Yes. "I always meant to see you all safe, if possible, over the mountains," said the wizard. "And now, by good management and good luck, I have done it. Indeed, we are now a good deal further east than I ever meant to come with you, for after all, this is not my adventure. I may look in on it again before it is all over, but in the meanwhile I have some other pressing business to attend to." The dwarves groaned and looked most distressed, and Bilbo wept. They had begun to think Gandalf was going to come all the way, and would always be there to help them out of difficulties. "I am not going to disappear this very instant," said he. "I can give you a day or 2 more. Probably I can help you out of your present plight, and I need a little help myself. We have no food, and no baggage, and no ponies to ride.
Well, yeah,
you don't know where you
that's
are.
a problem, isn't it?
It's a bit of a problem.
I mean, come on. Of course you're not going to leave us now.
Yeah, right. And you don't know where you are.
Yeah, but maybe I do.
Now I can tell you that.
Yes.
You are still some miles north of the path which we should have been following if we had not left the mountain pass in a hurry. Very few people live in these parts, unless they have come here since I was last down this way, which is some years ago. But there is somebody that I know of, who lives not far away. That somebody made the steps on the great rock, the Carrack, I believe he calls it. He does not come here often, certainly not in the daytime, and it is no good waiting for him. In fact, it would be very dangerous. We must go and find him, and if all goes well at our meeting, I think I shall be off, and wish you, like the eagles, farewell wherever you fare."
I love that. I love that passage. There's not quite as much to unpack, but what's there is really cool.
Yeah.
We get, not surprisingly, the reference to good luck very early in that passage. And yet also good management.
To be fair, yeah, there's good management in there, so there's an element of helping themselves.
Tolkien's kind of modus operandi all throughout, which is a combination
the interplay of free will and fate.
Exactly. And that's exactly what that is.
Of individual will and providence.
Of effort and volition, and an exercise of wisdom and making good choices, but then also with good luck. I love that. That just fits exactly the themes that we've been talking about all along. I love the hint of the other pressing business, of course, knowing what we know exactly what that business is. And that's the meeting of the White Council to discuss the necromancer. We'll learn a little bit more about that, I believe, next episode later in the chapter, right?
Yeah, I've got a little bit more on this later in this chapter. I probably should have put it here, but
it's
another reason to stick around, I guess.
And he mentions specifically going to the south and dealing with the I don't know if he mentions the necromancer, but he mentions.
I don't think he does it here. I think he does it later in the book.
That's what
later in the book
I know
when he comes back. He tells them where he was.
That's what it is. It's when he comes back. I thought it was later in this chapter, but you're right. It's when he returns.
Yeah.
Like we said, he's not going to leave them in this absolutely untenable state.
Yeah. No food, no bags, no ponies.
Don't know where
you are.
Have a nice day.
Peace, guys.
Yeah.
But it is very, very interesting that they'd kind of gotten used to his presence, and they really are shocked that he's going to leave, even though they've sort of always known this.
Yeah.
They've had to know. He's sort of forgetting that this is ultimately their fight.
Yeah.
It's gotten very nice having a wizard around.
It is
with
nice.
His exploding pine cones and his
great
big gondolin sword.
Wizard.
Yeah, exactly.
As somebody will soon
knows,
say, speaking of Beorn, we get the ominous hint. Somebody with a capital S.
Somebody with a capital S.
One wonders if that capital letter is audible practically. In terms of just how intimidating Gandalf must have
I did my best to make it so. I don't know.
Yeah, how do you...
Folks will have to let me know how well we got that
capital S somebody. I mean, how do you do that? Yeah. But one wonders.
Gollum could probably find a way. Nobody could say an S like Gollum.
No. Yeah. Well, nobody could say a single S if he's Gollum.
Gollum couldn't say a single
somebody.
Gollum had a way with sibilants.
Yes, he did. Microphones hated him, though. But I guess that's better than having a problem with plosives. My goodness.
Audio nerd jokes. I love it.
Total audio nerd jokes. Well, that's what we do.
Hey.
Things you might not have known. Well, you probably knew. But, I mean, if the average person wouldn't have known that coming into a podcast, what a sibilant and a plosive are. But
now some fun words for folks to look up.
We digress. We digress. That's what we do. So, of course, the dwarves are begging them, please don't leave. We'll give you gold. And Gandalf's like, I've already earned that.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've already earned some of your gold, guys. Killed the great goblin for you,
Got you out of it, just about every mess you've been in.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, they don't even have the gold yet. So
no. This is all
talking about counting their chickens before they've hatched.
That's like saying, I'll give you some of my Bitcoin. I mean, it may be worth a lot in theory.
Yeah.
But you got to find somebody who wants to buy it. All right. Yeah. I'm sure we're going to get schooled on that.
Unless folks are listening to us 5 years in the future and Bitcoin is now the official currency of the entire global economy.
Universe. Or people are listening to us 5 years from now when Bitcoin is like, junk stock at a penny.
What is Bitcoin? Yeah. One way or the other.
Yeah,
5 years from now, that reference to Bitcoin is going to be really interesting.
Isn't it? Because it's really going to be one or the other, isn't it? It's going to have dominated everything, or it's going to disappear like so many financial gurus think it will.
It's going to be worth about as much as the average florin.
Florin. And there's a Princess Bride reference for us right now. I love it. That's beautiful. Oh, my goodness.
Florin and Gilder.
Florins and Gilders.
Both medieval coins, I believe.
Actually, that's right. They are. Yeah. You may not have even intended it as a Princess Bride reference.
I didn't know. I was thinking of it as
the actual coin, not the...
Yeah.
More digression. This is going to be a long episode, folks. So for a while here, Bilbo seems to be strolling alongside Gandalf, and we're going to pick up right at that point. "And why is it called the Carrock?" asked Bilbo as he went along at the wizard's side.
He called it the Carrock because Carrock is his word for it. He calls things like that Carrocks, and this one is the Carrock because it is the only one near his home, and he knows it well.
"Who calls it? Who knows it?"
The somebody I spoke of, a very great person. You must all be very polite when I introduce you. I shall introduce you slowly, 2 by 2, I think, and you must be careful not to annoy him, or heaven knows what will happen. He can be appalling when he is angry, though he is kind enough if humored. Still, I warn you, he gets angry easily."
The dwarves all gathered round when they heard the wizard talking like this to Bilbo. "Is that the person you're taking us to now?" they asked.
"Couldn't you find someone more easy-tempered?"
"Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer?" and so on.
"Yes, it certainly is. No, I could not, and I was explaining very carefully," answered the wizard crossly. "If you must know more, his name is Beorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin changer."
"What? A furrier? A man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels?" asked Bilbo.
"Oh, good gracious heavens, no, 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 no," said Gandalf. "Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier again as long as you are within 100 miles of his house. Nor rug, cape, tippet, muff, nor any other such unfortunate word. He is a skin changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he's a huge black bear. Sometimes he is a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard. I cannot tell you much more, though that ought to be enough. Some say that he is a bear descended from the great and ancient bears of the mountains that lived there before the giants came. Others say that he is a man descended from the first men who lived before Smaug or the other dragons came into this part of the world, and before the goblins came into the hills out of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last is the true tale. He's not the sort of person to ask questions of."
I love
Boy, that last bit's not ominous at all.
No, not at all. No, not ominous at all.
No.
Nor is the part that Gandalf, a guy who is already kind of cranky and can be kind of nasty when he's angry, is himself describing Beorn as being appalling when he's angry. You kind of know that's bad when the cranky old man is telling you this guy is, gets angry easily and all that. It's like, wow, that's bad.
Certainly why the dwarves are saying, hey, can't you find somebody else?
I don't care if we
else?
have to go an extra day out of the way. Do we have to go to this guy? Really?
Yeah.
We'll break a little word nerdery out of this before we get too far afield, because I know we'll talk about other stuff, but I want to get into the word nerdery of the word Carrock. It is a compound word with both words actually meaning stone or rock. There's an Old English word, car or car, C-A-R-R, and of course English rock. Now, according to Rateliff in the History of the Hobbit, the Old English word was itself a borrowed word from Celtic and, quote, came to be especially applied to isolated rocks standing in the sea just off the Scottish and Northumbrian coasts. Well, that's not terribly specific. I mean, really? That's got to apply to, like, what, about 8 rocks, maybe? I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot more than that.
Well, people who have a lot of rocks around them have a lot of different words for rocks.
Names. That's true. I mean, Eskimos have, like, 30 words for snow, right?
So they say.
So they say. Now, Shippey tells us that Carrack is actually Old Welsh for rock, which is pretty cool, and that's really close to Carrack. That's C-A-R-R-E-C-C, in case I'm totally butchering the pronunciation, which is absolutely a possibility.
Welsh is one of those languages.
It is. It's a beautiful language, but I do not pretend. I do not.
That's what it looks like. It looks like Carrack. Let's say that.
Going back to Rateliff in History of the Hobbit, we learn that before he named it Carrock, he first considered naming it Sorneldon, which looks like it might have come from the Sindarin Sarn, meaning rock, and Nell, meaning point. And then Sinrock, Old English sin meant great or huge. And then Lamrock, which I could not figure out why that was in the running, but he finally eventually landed on Carrock. So, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in Rateliff on that. You know, I actually went to one of my favorite word nerd resources, Ring of Words. Yeah. And I think some of that stuff was actually in Ring of Words. But they also added, the lexicographers who wrote that book also pointed out that Tolkien apparently spent a couple of holidays in Cornwall in 1914 and 1932. And expressed some fondness for its rocky coastline. And there are apparently some rocks called the Carracks off the north coast of the Penwith Peninsula, Cornwall.
Oh, wow, okay.
And at one point, I think going probably all the way back, I think it was all the way back to 1742. It says here in my notes, the name was spelled Carrocks with an O in the second syllable. There's also a Carrick Roads in Cornwall, and that takes its name from some prominent rocks close by. Now, both of those words both of those names are derived from that same Celtic root that you talked about in the Welsh word, that Carrick. The Cornish version of that, because Cornish is also a Celtic language.
Yes, it is.
Carrick, Karrek, which is rock, which is related to the Welsh word carreg, meaning stone.
Okay.
And
that makes sense
definitely
geographically, because Cornwall, I mean, they would have been, that was Cornish, right? I mean, that was,
yeah.
And then Welsh was just north of that. In terms of where it was spoken.
It's a peninsula, and then Wales is
the kind of that jutting out to the west.
Yeah,
of the,
exactly. Yeah, and those were both sort of the areas where the Anglo-Saxons who moved into Britain kind of pushed all the Celtic, indigenous Celtic peoples to those two areas in the west. Yeah,
the uncivilized Anglo-Saxons thought the folks in Cornwall and Wales were uncivilized even more.
Right,
so.
right, and they called them the foreigners, which is what Wales means in Anglo-Saxon.
Yes, even though they were there, that's true.
Yeah, So yeah, definitely a Celtic root here. But interesting, as you brought up from Rateliff, it's a Celtic root with an Old English history as well. It was adopted into Old English pretty early and has been a part of English for a long time.
Pretty cool, and not surprising. I mean, that Tolkien would do something like that and spend so much time on just coming up with the name of one thing.
Of one rock that we see in this scene.
All these variations, the Sorneldon and the Sin Rock and the Lamrock, and landing on Carrock. And landing on it with all that and the knowledge of all that stuff in the background. Ton of work. That's the thing about world creation.
That's what we love about his world. I mean,
absolutely.
It's he puts so much effort into every single detail.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's why you don't
like
think
Leaf by
things
Niggle.
are,
For those who read that story, know about the time spent poring over a single leaf.
A single leaf. I love that story. And that's why we often say that there's really hardly ever a time that we would say this was just an accident that he said this.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
A coincidence.
Notice it's also the Carrick.
Oh, yes. Well,
and,
because...
and Gandalf kind of alludes to that.
Yeah.
He calls things like that Carracks, and this one is the Carrick because it's the only one near his home, and he knows it well. It's very much like the hill or the water.
That's a very good
point. That
point.
we saw back at the beginning.
That's a very good point. The first things we learn about Beorn, we kind of touched on this a little bit ago. He's unpredictable. He's appalling when angry, and he gets angry easy. But he's kind enough when humored.
Yeah.
It's probably a good thing he lives out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know that I'd want him as my neighbor. I mean,
mood
really.
Swings, yeah.
I mean, if I'm having a party at night and it happens to be a little bit too loud, I'm not going to like his reaction.
And you don't know whether it's been a good day or a bad day.
No. And he gets angry so easily. Yeah, you just don't know.
You say howdy, neighbor, and you might get a
swat across the face with a bear paw.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you just never know.
He might maul you.
He very well might. So we learn a little bit more about what it is to be a skin changer. Obviously,
I love the ambiguity of that word.
Isn't it? I know, I did too.
It's so great.
Yeah, he could have said shapeshifter from the
then...
beginning, but he didn't. He said skin changer. He changes his skin. Though clearly it's more than just his skin; it is his form. The huge black bear. My goodness, that's a pretty intense description. This the great, strong, black-haired man with the huge arms and great beard.
He doesn't sound like a guy you want to get angry.
No, not at all. Yeah. It doesn't sound like a guy you want to bother. Really, let's just keep on moving.
Doesn't sound like a guy you want to drop in on unexpectedly.
No.
He's not a hobbit who's going to politely.
This skin changer was fond of visitors. He had many pegs and.
When a dozen plus dwarves land on his doorstep unexpectedly.
Yeah, well, and we'll talk about
you.
That change. That is such a. We'll get to that, but isn't that a drastic comparison with Chapter 1 and the arrival of the dwarves? I love it. Yeah, it's so different. Yeah. So I love that we don't really know for sure what his line of descent is, but I'm with Gandalf, and I think we'll get to this as we talk about more. But the fact that at the beginning it's still a little bit vague as to whether he's a bear who can be a man or a man who can be a bear.
A bear changed into a man.
So his animals, they work for him. They talk to him. He doesn't eat them.
We got some questions on the animals, who talk to him. Are they other shapeshifters? But it really seems like they're not. I think they are
they're
actually
animals.
just beasts that are taught to speak. And Rateliff actually, in discussing this
Or
concept,
whose speech he understands. In other words,
well, that's true, because we'd see a few
we'll get it
times
later
on. We see things like, I heard him speaking in the speech of bears. So it implies that bears do have speech. It's just that
it's bear speech.
Somebody like you need to be somebody like Beorn to be able to understand it.
Right.
We can't
Exactly.
usually understand it. That's a good point.
So,
But I liked Rateliff had a quote from On Fairy Stories that he brought up in discussing this. In On Fairy Stories, Tolkien says, beasts and birds and other creatures often talk like men in real fairy stories. In some part, often small, this marvel derives from one of the primal desires that lie near the heart of fairy, the desire of men to hold communion with other living things.
yeah.
So I think that's cool. Tolkien has taken this concept that is key to a lot of fairy stories, and he's brought it into his own story. And I think it's significant that you have to be somebody like a Beorn to be able to commune with these beasts. I mean, we see, we're sitting here talking about he's not a guy you would want to live next to. He has sort of isolated himself from society, not in a sinister way. We've talked about self-isolation is a bad thing in the past. I don't think it's that. It's just he's kind of separated himself from society.
This isn't the Unabomber living out in the cabin.
Right.
This isn't,
right. And it's not, it's not a Melkoric self-isolation or anything like that.
No.
It's just kind of wanting to be closer to nature as opposed to civilization. There's a wildness to it.
Exactly. And because he's not isolated, he's just isolated. Well, he's isolated from others like him because there are no others like him. So there's a difference
that's a good
there.
point.
But he's not completely isolated because he does have his animals and he communicates with them.
Right. He has a community. He has built up a community around himself.
And that is key. And we're gonna spend some time here on Beorn before we move on. So just heads up, this might last a while.
Bear with us. I didn't plan that.
Who had 42 minutes in the pool on that? I just want to know before somebody said bear with us on this. Whoever had 42 minutes wins. So he doesn't eat the animals. Okay, we know he doesn't eat the animals that he keeps, so no domestic animals are eaten. And then it says that he doesn't hunt or eat wild animals, so he eats no animals at all. So he lives, he eats a vegetarian diet. I was almost going to say vegan diet, but I would imagine cream is like milk in that regard, so that's not vegan.
That's true.
Just
so he's
vegetarian.
more of a lacto-vegetarian. Yeah.
Lacto-vegetarian. Cream and honey. Now, I have to admit, I'm not sure how that helps him build his amazing physique. It's not exactly a high-protein diet.
No.
But, he's Beorn, so who knows what he does.
He is smart
as a
enough
bear.
to keep his own bees, though. Like, you got to give him that. He doesn't have to steal honey like Winnie the Pooh.
I try to picture Beorn instead of shape-shifting into this massive black bear
just shape-shifting into this
Winnie the Pooh.
This cuddly little bear in a
with
red
a
shirt.
red shirt and no pants, which is still weird to me.
Yep.
Now, the evidence for Gandalf's
Oh, bother.
Oh, bother. So Gandalf, remember we said earlier that Gandalf says, I think the last two of the two stories is the true story, that he's a man descended from the first men. And his evidence for that is that he saw him once on top of the Carrock as a bear, growling in the tongue of bears, that the day will come when they will perish and I shall go back, talking about the goblins in the mountains.
The goblins.
So he thinks that's where he comes from. But I tell you, I think the quote that I wanted to pull here more than anything else was something from Corey Olsen from exploring J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. The important thing about Beorn is the fact that he is both at once, man and bear, human and beast. Even his name reflects this duality. Beorn is an Anglo-Saxon word that is often used to mean man or warrior, but the word also means bear in that language. And as an aside, we'll be spending more time on word nerdery there too, but back to the Olsen quote. We should remember the conflict between the eagles as predators and the woodmen as settlers and farmers, cultivating the land and trying to tame a small section of the wild. Beorn in himself contains both sides of that conflict. I thought that was really insightful.
That's a great quote.
Isn't it? Olsen nails it a lot.
So
but
the conflict... Yeah, so you got the sort of classic shapeshifter motif, you know, and it's almost it's almost like the werewolf motif. During the day he's just an ordinary guy. At night he's this terrifying predatory animal. And so the conflict between those two sides is really sort of stands in for the conflict between the cultivation of the land through civilization and the natural wild. That's
predators.
That's awesome.
It is cool. It's an insight that I don't think I would have caught. I mean, I love this little isolated, farm essentially. With the cattle and the horses and the cream and the bees and all of that. But I never would have thought about it as kind of this as the conflict in a nutshell. With taking a look at the eagles as predators and the woodmen as the farmers, and Beorn is really both sides of that conflict. Is both a wild
He's straddling
animal.
the line, and I think that's why it's important for there just to be this one homestead in the wild. He's not the chieftain of a big village.
No.
At least not yet.
No, you're right.
But if he were, then that would be skewing more towards the side of civilization. But the fact that he's just sort of one outpost there,
which will happen in a few in a generation. But
we'll find that out at the end of this book. Actually, yeah,
absolutely.
That's really, really a brilliant insight.
It is.
I think I'm gonna.
That's because Olson came up with it, not me.
Right. I was going really literal, looking into whether he was a man or whether he's a bear. I mean, I think we all think he's a man. Tolkien actually did say once in a letter
all I can
that
hear
he
in my
wasn't
head
a man.
now is he a man or is he a Muppet? I'm sorry.
That's we were talking about that movie before we actually started rolling.
Oh goodness,
that's great. Man,
get that song out of my head. Okay, sorry.
But Tolkien did say in letter 144 to Naomi Mitchison, he did say that Beorn is a man. He says Beorn is dead because
she was asking whether he's still alive.
She was asking where is Beorn at the time
now?
of Lord of the Rings, and he says Beorn is dead, though a skin changer and no doubt a bit of a magician. Beorn was a man.
There you go.
But that's really all he said about it,
that is actually
and he's
all he
really
said.
talking more about the fact that he's a man. Not an elf or a dwarf.
Right,
he's
he
not
doesn't
still
have
alive
serial
after
longevity, right?
After all that time, yeah. But still, by saying he is a man, he does give us that much at least.
He doesn't say Beorn was a beast. He doesn't say Beorn was an animal. He says Beorn was a man, and that's
and a bit of a magician, but that's all we get on it. And he leaves this enigma out there.
Yeah.
And as I said, in the intro, Tolkien did say there should be some enigmas. Yeah.
Well, that's it's a mythical world, and that's important.
Yeah.
I think there's time for us to take this a little bit of a sidebar. Rateliff has a really long essay in History of the Hobbit on Beorn and maybe some of the inspiration for Beorn. And I would recommend that folks who have the time and that book read it, but I'm going to reference the shorter version that I found in Anderson's Annotated Hobbit. In the notes for this chapter, Anderson points out something that Tom Shippey has observed, and that is that Beorn has, quote, a very close analog in Bothvar Bjarki, a hero from the Norse saga of Hrolfr Kraki. I do hope, by the way, that I'm pronouncing those correctly.
It sounds good to me.
I hope so.
Not that I'm the expert. I'm far from an expert on this.
The name Bothvar Bjarki means little bear, by the way. So in this saga, in the saga of Hrolfr Kraki, there's a battle, and Bothvar is sitting silent on the sidelines. I think if I remember correctly, he looks even like he's asleep. He's just totally idle, while his double, a great bear, is defending the king. Now, when the men rouse Bothvar, the bear disappears, and then the king and all his men are killed, including Bothvar. But Anderson actually thinks that Beorn's closer analog is Bothvar's father in the same saga, Beorn, whose story, of course, is told in that saga. Beorn spurns the advances of a queen, and she curses him to be a bear during the day and a man at night. Now, it's flipped with Beorn, but it's interesting.
Right,
and the thing that's interesting about all this, because, of course, you think, well, I'm sure it's a Norse saga. Of course, Tolkien was familiar with it. Oh, no, he was really familiar with it. Anderson tells us that one of Tolkien's students at Leeds, a woman by the name of Stella Mills, translated the saga of Hrolfr Kraki under the supervision of Tolkien's colleague and close friend E.V. Gordon. Several years later, Mills' translation was published with an introduction by Gordon, and Tolkien himself was included in the dedication, and Mills would be a close friend of the Tolkien family for years. So he very clearly knew.
He had an intimate relationship with this story.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be surprising if either or both Bothvar and Beorn were some sort of inspiration for the character of Beorn.
No, it's great. I mean, when I was reading that bit from from Rateliff.
Yeah.
I thought of a few different. Honestly, there's a ton of great stuff.
There really is. That's why I didn't even bring it up,
Beorn.
because it's such a.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I could only bring in this part of it. No, I can't just bring in that part of his essay.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
too much there.
I mean, I would start by saying, one of the fascinating things for me in reading Rateliff, I had no idea that Beorn had a totally different name when he was first invented.
Yeah.
He was originally called Medwed or Medved.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which way to pronounce that. Medwed.
Because it's it's from Slavic, right?
Yeah, it's from a Slavic word for bear, which literally means honey eater. And I confirmed with one of our listeners, Maria in Serbia, who's my my Slavic language
Slavic
consultant,
expert.
whatever I have.
There you go.
Yeah, she confirmed that that word does exist in Serbian and in Russian today.
Oh, wow,
Medved. Really interesting about that, but yeah, it means honey eater, and it is basically just the word for bear.
Right.
Rare for Tolkien to reach out to the Slavic languages
That's
for
true.
inspiration.
That's true. He did tend to stick with Old English and Norse,
Well,
and
Germanic or
and
things in sort of in that part of the Indo-European family.
the Northern European. Yeah.
Yeah, Radagast is one that he might have also gotten from Slavic,
That's
but there's
true.
a ton on that in Rateliff that I don't think we have time to go into.
We don't.
But he ended up landing on Beorn, and I like that better because it's a pun in a few ways.
It is, isn't it?
As you mentioned, first of all, the word in Old English meant both literally bear and then figuratively warrior.
Right.
It's also really cool because, who's the most famous warrior in all of Old English literature?
Ding, ding, ding.
Beowulf. And Beowulf actually means bear. It's actually a kenning. If you remember, we talked about kennings a few episodes ago. It literally means beewolf, and that's actually a kenning or a metaphor for bear because bears are predators who eat honey.
Right, exactly.
And I did read, which I had not heard of before, that there actually is potentially some connection between Beowulf and Bodvar Bjarki, who you were just talking about. I think some things about Beowulf's fight with Grendel sort of echo that
Very
story
much
you're just
so.
telling about
Well,
Bodvar's fight.
and the dragon too. So, there's
Okay, right, yeah.
there's a couple
Yeah.
of things that there's enough overlap that that some folks are. Yeah, there's definitely some sort of connection, it seems, between those two characters.
Right. And then the last thing that's super cool about this, and this is mentioned in Ring of Words, and I think was also alluded to by Rateliff, the Norse warriors called berserkers.
Oh, yeah.
I think most people have heard of. They got their name from the Old Norse bear sirker, which literally means bear shirt, which, going back to E.V. Gordon,
Yeah.
the Norse philologist, he actually explained the name berserker as being related to a superstition that they were skin changers, that they got superhuman strength from their animal nature.
Yeah,
So
that fits.
Tolkien
That
is-
makes Beorn fit so perfectly.
Yeah, so Tolkien is dipping into this really
Rich,
deep well
rich history
of rich history of these words for bear and for warrior, and he wraps all that up into this one character who appears for a chapter,
Yeah, and then like for
shows
a
up
line.
briefly at the end.
Yeah.
So cool, and it's
Though
just,
he does show up more in the book at the end than he did in the movie.
that is
Just
true.
saying.
That is true. Yeah. I know. He didn't show up in the movie at all, did he?
He did
At the
in the
end.
extended director's cut. It
Was okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
Again, I only watched each one, the original and the director's
Yeah.
cut, I think once or twice. So
It's such a great moment when he comes back, and it gives Tolkien a chance to tell you a little bit about what happens after. And
yeah, it does.
yeah,
Yeah. Anyway, we've gotten
Cool
some. One of our more vocal supporters has pointed out that we often digress into criticizing
one of our good
movies
friends,
and,
one good friend of the podcast has
Indeed,
pointed out that
and he's right. We have
Yeah.
often kind of gone there when we didn't mean to, and that
Yeah.
would be another example of how I accidentally and easily did that. I have to say, in all credit, we're getting to a point in the story that I thought that the movie did some relatively good. It was a fair representation. The introduction of the dwarves, in particular, which was in the extended edition.
Yeah.
I thought that they got that rather nice. Even if I'm not quite still sold on Beorn, in terms of his physical appearance, it was close. So,
yeah.
speaking
I
of Beorn now and the arrival, I think you've got a passage to read.
Yeah, I probably do. I probably need to get my ebook up. Here we go.
Well, that was a very long sidebar.
We got so wrapped up in word nerdery and stuff. I just kind of
word nerdery on
got
Carrock
lazy and had my
on
ebook.
Beorn and on all of that gets of the sidebar and
Yeah.
Bodvar. I mean, how many people hear about Bodvar Bjarki in their podcasts? Not many, I would guess.
now all of you.
Now all of you.
That's why we do it, folks.
Which is still, by the way,
hopefully you enjoy it.
not many.
We're just...
Well said. Well said. All right. Bilbo and the dwarves had now plenty to think about, and they asked no more questions. They still had a long way to walk before them. Up slope and down dale they plodded. It grew very hot. Sometimes they rested under the trees, and then Bilbo felt so hungry that he would have eaten acorns, if any had been ripe enough yet to have fallen to the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon before they noticed that great patches of flowers had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted. Especially there was clover, waving patches of coxcomb clover and purple clover, and wide stretches of short white sweet honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirring and a droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere, and such bees! Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I would swell up as big again as I am. They were bigger than hornets. The drones were bigger than your thumb, a good deal, and the bands of yellow on their deep black bodies shone like fiery gold. "We are getting near," said Gandalf. "We are on the edge of his bee pastures." After a while they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond these to a high thorn hedge through which you could neither see nor scramble. "You had better wait here," said the wizard to the dwarves, "and when I call or whistle, begin to come after me. You will see the way I go. But only in pairs, mind, about 5 minutes between each pair of you. Bombur is fattest and will do for 2. He had better come alone and last. Come on, Mr. Baggins, there is a gate somewhere round this way." And with that he went off along the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him.
While Bombur collapsed in a puddle of tears.
Very insensitive, I have to say.
Fat-shamed again, man.
Come on. Man.
Gandalf and his fat-shaming.
Honestly.
So not nice.
Seriously.
By the way, I loved, again, this is another landscape description that I absolutely love. The up and down the dales, the resting under the trees, but then specifically the patches of flowers and the clover.
Types of clover, yeah.
Purple clover. And I mean, love that. Beautiful description. Until I get to the bees, then I want to run screaming.
Big
My
bees.
Humongous bees. Drones bigger than your thumb. Yeah, I'm out.
Yeah.
Bees, gone.
Yeah.
I am done.
Nope.
No, if Bilbo doesn't like heights, let me just tell you, I'm not a big fan of bees.
Yeah.
I can deal with heights.
And I
more
have
than
to say, there are some people now, it's kind of getting to be kind of a hip thing to have your own beehive in your backyard if you have a big enough yard. I have thought about it just because I love honey.
Well, yeah.
But when I think about big bees like this, I think, nope, there's no way I could do it.
Not gonna
I
do
could
it.
not do my own beekeeping.
Not gonna do it.
I'm not man enough for that. Sorry.
No, and if my neighbor were to decide that they wanted to have, their own hive, I think something unfortunate might happen to it. Then again, I live in a...
You'd smoke it out.
Our backyards are like 3 feet deep, so I don't think anybody's... I think our HOA would frown on having
That's
a
about like
hive.
mine. I'm pretty sure bees are not allowed in my...
You might be in Texas, but you're not on some ranch in the middle of the...
Right.
Right. Acorns, eating acorns. Now, I always thought that acorns, unless they were, seriously processed, were like way too bitter to eat, like raw.
I think you're right. I think they have really high levels of tannins in them that are not actually all that healthy for you.
Well, no, not that high. I mean, but that's, I guess, telling you how hungry he is, so that's fair.
I mean, I know people do it. I've never done it.
No.
So I'm not that kind of woodsman.
I'm not desperate enough to eat an acorn.
But I know
raw.
people do it. I think, you can process. I think there's like a
you can
water
pound them into
process.
some
You can
sort of a
leach it out
flour
or something. Yeah.
And I'm sure you could, but certainly eating it raw sounds a little bit odd.
But it is significant that Bilbo would have actually considered it. That's how
hungry he is. Yeah. At this point, he's not even thinking about bacon. He's thinking about even anything. Acorns.
Like, I will eat these bitter, potentially poisonous little nuts.
Yeah,
on the
that'll probably
ground.
break half my teeth just from trying to eat the darn thing. I love that in that landscape description, by the way, we get this change to the cultivated lands. And it's almost gradual. The flowers, and then you start to get the smell, and then the bees, and then you get that really cool hedge, which is very clearly an indication of residence, of civilization, if you will.
Right. Yep.
Anyway, great stuff. And then, of course, the plan. We get an introduction to the plan to come in pairs. Poor Bombur again. I was only saying that half in jest. I mean, that poor guy.
It really, I mean, come on.
I mean, he
dude.
tried. Remember in the first chapter, he was the one who asked for salad, for crying out loud.
Right. He's working hard. That's the point.
is.
I mean, he's working hard, and Gandalf should recognize that.
Yeah, instead telling him, oh, he's fattest and has to come last.
I mean, he's walking with him.
Thorin should come last. He's the king, man. He should get like or first. I mean, one or the other. He needs to have some place.
Well, I guess
of
he
honor.
does end up coming first after Gandalf and Bilbo.
Yeah. So they get, through.
And I guess the only reason he didn't come with Gandalf is because Gandalf didn't want a dwarf to.
That's
to
exactly
show up.
right. Gandalf knew, and we'll find out exactly what Beorn's initial impression of dwarves is, followed by his fascinating response to Thorin's presence.
Yeah.
So they get in past the hedge, and you get the gate, and then you get gardens, then the buildings themselves. The horses show up. They look at them, and then they turn off and go away. And Gandalf knows exactly what they're doing. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
Gandalf knows what they're doing.
They've gone to tell him that strangers are here. They've gone to tell him that the arrivals
thing
are
is,
here.
that tells me he knows about Beorn.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Beorn, as we're going to soon find out, doesn't know about him.
Doesn't know anything about him. Yeah. Well, Gandalf has studied, and and we know that he knows Radagast, and Gandalf probably talks to Radagast. Radagast probably shares a lot more information with Gandalf than
vice versa, I'm sure.
vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure Gandalf's pretty good at getting information out of Radagast. Well,
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and pick up there after the horses have left to go send word. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls of which were formed by the wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was lying a great oak trunk with many lopped branches beside it. Standing near was a huge man with a thick black beard and hair, and great bare arms and legs with knotted muscles. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to his knees, and was leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him with their noses at his shoulder.
Ugh, here they are,
He said to the horses.
They don't look dangerous. You can be off.
He laughed a great rolling laugh, put down his axe, and came forward.
Who are you, and what do you want?
He asked gruffly, standing in front of them and towering tall above Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could easily have trotted through his legs without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic.
I am Gandalf,
said the wizard.
Never heard of him.
Growled the man.
And what's this little fellow?
He said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his bushy black eyebrows.
That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family and unimpeachable reputation, said Gandalf.
Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off, and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons.
I am a wizard, continued Gandalf. I have heard of you, if you have not heard of me, but perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood. Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again,
said Beorn.
Well, now I know who you are, or who you say you are. What do you want?
Well, he's a friendly fellow.
He is, yeah.
He's also huge. I don't think I took notes on that. I only realized as I'm talking it through. Bilbo, we know, is probably, between 3 and 3.5 feet tall? Because, I mean, I think the tallest, 4 foot tall and could ride a horse, right?
Right,
and
yeah.
I believe most hobbits are in that 3 foot range. So let's even assume that he's not
3 to
particularly
3.5
tall.
feet, yeah.
Let's assume he's just 36 inches. He could go between his legs without ducking to avoid the bottom of the tunic. So we're talking about, what, a 44-inch, 46-inch inseam? I mean, unless the tunic's especially short, and I don't expect that it is, maybe a 48-inch inseam? Good.
That's a really good point.
Golly, this man's tall.
Never stopped to think about that.
Huge. Well, and you get another clue with this, that the horses were standing by him with their noses at his shoulder. That's a very tall man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huge.
This is one thing that I think some of the illustrators who have drawn Beorn really get right. There's some out there, and I can't think of any specifically right now, but there's some. He's just
well, if we can
huge.
find a couple that we really like, we'll
maybe
post
we'll
them
do
in our
that.
show notes. Yeah. I mean, I love that, how Tolkien this time, unlike in maybe some other instances where we introduce a character, gives some visual scale references.
Very clear visual scale.
The horses with the noses at his shoulder, Bilbo being able to run through his legs without ducking, and the fact that he towers over Gandalf. That's
I think he has to, because he's such a remarkable height. He has to,
Yeah, you'd have to.
He has to show us just how remarkable.
Well, yeah, I mean, having like a 48-inch inseam and then a normal top would look really weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, not so intimidating there.
No. I love his "What's this little fellow?"
What's this?
Not who.
Yeah, what? You're right. You're right.
What's this little fellow?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he kind of looks like a dwarf, but doesn't have a beard. Is he like a baby dwarf? Because I don't like dwarves. We'll get to that, but yeah, what is he? I like that. That is a good point. And I have to say, I love the end of this passage. The fact that Beorn says, "Now I know who you are," or who you say you are.
Yeah.
He is rightly, in many ways, very suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and later on in this chapter, I think we'll get to it next episode. He says, if you lived as close to the borders of Mirkwood as I do,
you wouldn't trust anybody closer than your brother, I think is what he says, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, he's right. He's right. Yeah. My goodness, what an introduction, though. Beorn he goes ahead and says, "All right, come on in." After Gandalf
hearing
tells
about goblins, I think it's worth saying. Gandalf says we've had some trouble with goblins. Gandalf knows exactly what to say.
Yeah, he knows
to start getting him on their side. He knows he hates goblins.
Yeah.
So
it's okay. Well, then come on in and tell me your story.
Right.
And they get to come into this great hall, and I love. This is another one of those illustrations that's in our edition. The
page 113 of our book, I believe.
Yeah. Just a gorgeous illustration of this hall. And it's just a classic Norse hall, isn't it? I mean, this is, the long...
A wide hall with a fireplace in the middle.
The fireplace in the middle.
A wood fire burning, smoke rising.
Yeah,
with an opening in the roof to let the fire out. Yeah.
Yeah, for the smoke. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the only light in there. It's
It really is very much like, like you said, like sort of an old Germanic mead hall, really.
Yeah, it really is.
But rustic. Yeah. It's not Meduseld.
No, but you know what? The model is still like Meduseld, isn't it? I mean, it's the same
definitely
concept.
the same. It's the same, kind of shape,
architecture,
same concept.
Yeah,
exactly.
But like you said, rustic. That's really the great word for it, because here it's a simple thing that one giant man, has built, and Meduseld is the result of a king ordering a massive construction project. So it's gilded, and there's all the coats of arms and it's a king's hall. You're right.
Tapestries and
exactly, the tapestries. Oh man, I love that. And there are more vents in there, if I remember correctly. We hear about the light coming in through the vents and things. And we'll get to that obviously when we get to Meduseld in
a couple of years.
2.5 years. But in the meantime, they don't stay in this hall for very long. They end up back passing out of it and into this sort of veranda that faces to the south and is just filled with the light of the setting sun. And they start telling their story. And of course, Gandalf, knowing how to tell a story, tells a heck of a story. So at first, he starts to talk about, a friend or two. And,
a friend or two.
Or two.
And then,
So
right away, he's sort of
he's already upping the ante a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Or under-promising. I'm not sure which way that would go.
Under-promise, over-deliver. Yeah.
Right.
So, he kind of gives Beorn the chance to back out of it, right? I didn't want to bother you with a lot of us until I found out if you're busy.
And he says, hey, until I found out if you were busy, right. I didn't want to bother you.
If this isn't a good time, we can come back.
But, hey, I'll call my buddies if I may.
Yeah. So.
And then he says, okay.
Yeah, and then that's where you get to pick up a part of the passage for us.
All right. So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came round the house by the garden path and stood bowing low before them.
1 or 3, you meant, I see,
said Beorn.
But these aren't hobbits. They are dwarves.
Thorin Oakenshield at your service. Dori at your service, said the two dwarves, bowing again.
I don't need your service, thank you, said Beorn. But I expect you need mine. I'm not over fond of dwarves, but if it is true you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, I believe, and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of goblins and are not up to any mischief in my lands, What are you up to, by the way?
They are on their way to visit the land of their fathers, away east beyond Mirkwood, put in Gandalf. And it is entirely an accident that we are in your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that should have brought us to the road that lies to the south of your country, when we were attacked by the evil goblins, as I was about to tell you.
Go on telling, then,
said Beorn, who was never very polite.
No, and he wasn't. And that's that's a key thing, isn't it? What I notice here, as we see eventually, he does, allow all the dwarves in, and, you've read the chapter, so you know that. He's not polite. He's still not polite, even when they're all there, but he's very hospitable. And there's a difference. Yeah. There's a difference. It comes back to that whole wild thing. We keep seeing that now that we're in the wild, we see how different things are. In this case, his wildness is more that he's just undomesticated.
Yeah, he doesn't go in for politeness, niceties, and the formalities of so-called civilized life.
Right.
But he is kind.
He is
hospitable.
He is hospitable, very much so.
And he will, as we'll see, he'll lend a hand to the enemies of his enemies.
Exactly. The enemy is my friend, and that's what really ends up being the driving force here. Because he doesn't like dwarves otherwise.
Right.
I'm not going to say he dislikes them, but he's not over fond of them. How's that?
Yeah, that's exactly what
I don't know that there's genuine animosity like we sort of, would get with the Elven King. I was going to name him.
Right,
I don't want to name anybody. With the Elven King, where there's that animosity with dwarves. But
you get the sense later on that he just doesn't really connect with them. I'm skipping ahead a little bit to sort of his reaction to their tales,
to the stories.
Like
you're right.
They just don't really have anything in common.
Yeah,
and so
his love of nature, their love of smithcraft,
right?
Totally different.
They're just kind of in different.
Systems.
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Different value systems.
But they're enemies of the goblins, and that
if they're
matters.
enemies of goblins, hey.
Yeah.
Enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And I did notice that just like the Goblin King, or the Great Goblin, I should say, Beorn knows who Thorin is.
Mm-hmm.
He has a reputation and a name. And this is a big deal. I mean, even here in the wild, both under the mountain with the Goblin King, or the Great Goblin, and here with Beorn, Thorin's reputation precedes him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, he even knows his lineage, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
son of Thrain, son of Thror. That's a big deal. So,
yeah, it sells the idea that Thorin is an enormously important dwarf.
Mm-hmm. It does.
People know him.
It's interesting though, because Beorn, being so isolated, that he knows who Thorin is.
Yeah, yeah.
But
he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who who reads all the celebrity gossip sites and. Have you heard? Thorin Oakenshield might be undertaking a quest to retake the Lonely Mountain. Yeah, he's not up on all that stuff.
He does not watch what's that TMZ.
TMZ.
He does not watch TMZ.
No.
And neither do I. I had to really rack my brain to think of what that was. Oh man. It's usually like what's in some waiting room, and you're like, oh man, why do they have it on this channel? For crying out loud, change it to anything else.
I don't know that I've ever actually even seen it. I mean, I'm sure I've seen it on somewhere, but
it was on some waiting room television.
Sure.
I don't know if it was at a doctor's office or something. And it's kind of like, man, I would rather
someplace where you can't control, and you're like, great, this is what's on.
And you're like, please, somebody, I'd rather watch somebody
fine.
folding
I'll read
socks
Better Homes and
than
Gardens.
This. Yeah,
instead.
exactly. Seriously. Anyway. We digress.
Nothing wrong with Better Homes and Gardens, by the way. It's just, it probably isn't the first magazine I would gravitate towards.
I'm going to dig for Automobile. I'm going to dig for,
Car and Driver, Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, definitely. Automobile, Car and Driver, Road and Track, and then I'll start looking at other options.
Yeah.
All right, so they start coming in, a couple more pairs, and then I've got a spot here in the middle of the story that I'm going to read.
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies, for there were more than 6 of us, and, well, here are 2 more.
Just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared and bowed so low that their beards swept the stone floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their best to be frightfully polite, and kept on nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hoods before their knees in proper dwarf fashion, till he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. They looked so comical.
Troop was right, he said. A fine comic one. Come in, my merry men. And what are your names? I don't want your service just now. Only your names. And then sit down and stop wagging.
Balin and Dwalin, they said, not daring to be offended, and sat flop on the floor looking rather surprised.
Now go on again,
said Beorn to the wizard. Where was I? Oh, yes, I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or two with a flash.
Good. It is some good being a wizard, then.
And that's where we'll stop for the moment. Just more to discuss here. I love kind of how dismissive he is. Again, it's not just that he doesn't need their service. He doesn't want to know anything other than their names. Just sit down and shut up, basically.
Just your names. Sit down, stop wagging.
And that wonderful last line.
I love not daring. Balin and Dwalin are not daring to be
offended.
It's great. Just like,
oh man,
these are dwarves. They're a proud people. But no, I'm not gonna.
I'm not gonna be offended. Not even gonna. Yeah, that's a wise. That's a wise move, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's warming to them a little bit, The chuckling,
laughs.
Now at least they're comic
now.
relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could use a good laugh. Yeah. And I love this last line though that I read. That it's some good being a wizard. Then remember when we talked about that line with Corey Olson back in what would that have been? Episode 52.
Yeah.
That was a great moment.
How he says that like a wizard is something you can
become.
You can go to school and
like it's some good being a plumber. Then
right. That's right. Yeah,
was his analogy, and like you could aspire to become one, and anybody with the proper training
it's something you could say. This is what I want to do with my life. Is I want to be a wizard.
I love that. That was a great
conversation. And we know
conversation.
that's not what the wizards are in Tolkien's world.
I almost feel like we should have had that be the start of our season 2 rather than the end of season 1. I feel like anybody who's joined us recently and has not gone back and listened to that is really doing themselves a disservice. So, folks, if you have just joined us over the last dozen episodes or so and have not listened to anything in season 1 because you think it's all Silmarillion, it's not. You should probably go back and listen to the last 3, which was discussion of the movies. First one, The Lord of the Rings, second one, The Hobbit, and then the third one of those 3, the last 3 episodes we did for season 1, was that interview with the
interview
Tolkien
with
professor.
Corey Olson. Yep,
or as I should say it, the Tolkien professor. You got to italicize that. If nothing else, Professor Drought will get we'll get a good sticker out of that.
Right, exactly. Which we hope people enjoyed that episode.
Yeah,
it just came out.
Yeah. Where was this? There was something about. It was earlier. I wrote it down here, but I realized I think it was earlier when they were talking about. No, I'm sorry. It was later. That's what it was. We end up we don't read much of this story because there's so much to discuss.
There's just so much, and it's just dwarves coming in.
It's just dwarves coming in, so it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other until you get to 13 of them.
And Gandalf just gradually feeding him a little bit more and more of the story.
Right. Later in the story, he talks about the time when they're in the trees, and he says something where I'm trying to find it. Help me find this. Talking about
was it? Oh, it was when Beorn said, "I wish I had been there."
Yes, that's the one. So Gandalf gets. Yeah, I would have given him more than fireworks. It sounds like this is going sort of Beorn's wildness. He's dissatisfied with the level of violence. Like he didn't do enough. And as we'll see,
that's an interesting take on that. I hadn't thought about it that way. I was just kind of thinking. I'm thinking of it as he's so on board with them. He's so rooting for them.
Oh yeah.
He's just kind of like, oh man, if I'd have been there, I'd have
I would have done a lot more than that. That's what he's kind of saying. Like, that's great, and he shows us in the next half of this chapter exactly what he would do. When he does it, the skin of the we get the skin of the warg and the head of the goblin. And again, we won't get that tonight, or this morning, but good stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see. I love how Bilbo finally kind of
it suddenly dawns on him what Gandalf's doing.
Yeah, he understands. Now I get what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a little slow there. Slow on the uptake, Bilbo.
And yeah, I mean, it's, he never invited people into his house if he could help it, and now he's got 15 strangers sitting on his porch.
I know.
You have to
crazy.
think Bilbo understands what that's like more than most people.
Yeah, and that's I wanted to talk about that difference between the way the dwarves arrived at Bilbo's house and the assumptions that they had, and then the way they arrive at Beorn's house.
A really visible power balance.
Very
difference
much so.
in power balance.
Yeah.
Just imposing on Bilbo.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And
because
and
Gandalf
unashamedly
basically told them
imposing
you
on
can.
Bilbo.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, that's true.
It all comes back to
And
Gandalf.
let's face it,
and his
Bilbo is,
knowledge.
Bilbo is a guy who they're going to employ,
Yes.
He's not somebody that they're begging for assistance from.
Right. He's also not a shapeshifter who can
He's
turn
also
into a
not
bear
a
that can kill
giant
them.
man who turns into a bear.
That is true. That is true. I would tend to think that one would be a little more cautious in approaching a giant man who can turn into a bear.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. But
I mean, that's just basic, field tactics.
field tactics. I really do love this story, and I'm almost sad that we couldn't read more of it. But like you said, it really is just Gandalf telling the story. Oh, stop! Bring out a couple dwarves.
It's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant in the humor.
It's really, really well written,
and I think without doing like a fully dramatized.
That's the thing. It had to be a radio play to really get it right.
Which we can't do.
No. Not just for lack of license, but lack of skill.
Right. Exactly. I meant both of those.
Let's be clear.
But yeah, I mean, I think it really comes across when you're reading it. I think there's really no way we could have done it justice. But folks have read it. Folks know how awesome it is. So.
And I have to say, this is a moment that I thought the films in the extended edition got right. Got mostly right. The arrival was well done, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, the actor playing Beorn is not quite what I imagine.
No, he was very good.
To look at him. But he was very good. His facial expressions.
Yes. The eyebrows.
You got a lot of good humor, a lot of good reaction shots and things like that. There was definitely a sense of kind of a humorous, like, what is going on here kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I thought he did that well, even though his appearance wasn't quite what I imagined.
Yeah, exactly. And even with that said, I thought he did a fantastic job of filling the role as it was written for him, even if it wasn't quite what I would have thought Beorn would be like. But Beorn's a tough character. I mean, no matter how you do him, somebody's going to be deeply disappointed. The bear was great, by the way, the giant bear that he was. But very, very scary. So they finally get dinner, and I love Beorn's thing. Like, this was such a great story. If all the beggars that showed up here could tell such a good one, they might find me kinder. In other words, I might not have, torn them into shreds. It's kind of what I'm hearing him say there. I may be wrong, but basically he's like, you've earned your supper.
You guys are faring a lot better than the last 20 people who showed up at my door begging.
Yeah, see their bones over there in the corner.
Where are they? Oh, you're walking on their bones right now.
Yeah, exactly.
There'd be like a
trap door.
They'd be like the paths of the dead in Peter Jackson's Return of the King with the skulls just...
I was thinking like the trap door in Jabba the Hutt's palace.
With the Rancor.
With the Rancor underneath. You go.
He's got a bear down there.
Yeah, there you go. That's where he goes at night.
His brother Bjarki.
Bothvar Bjarki's down there. Okay, so we get to dinner, and you now have, we're almost near the end of this, you've got a passage to read.
All right. Inside the hall it was now quite dark. Beorn clapped his hands, and in trotted 4 beautiful white ponies and several large long-bodied gray dogs. Beorn said something to them in a queer language, like animal noises turned into talk. They went out again, and soon came back, carrying torches in their mouths, which they lit at the fire and stuck in low brackets on the pillars of the hall about the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished, and carry things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out boards and trestles from the side walls, and set them up near the fire. Then, bat, 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 was heard.
I was wondering if you were going to do that.
When am I going to get another chance to do that? Come on.
That's true.
And in came some snow-white sheep, led by a large coal-black ram. One bore a white cloth embroidered at the edges with figures of animals. Others bore on their broad backs trays with bowls and platters and knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid on the trestle tables. These were very low enough even for Bilbo to sit at comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 low-seated benches with wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the far end he put Beorn's big black chair of the same sort, in which he sat with his great legs stuck far out under the table. These were all the chairs he had in his hall, and he probably had them low like the tables for the convenience of the wonderful animals that waited on him. What did the rest sit on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came in rolling round, drum-shaped sections of logs, smoothed and polished, and low enough even for Bilbo. So soon they were all seated at Beorn's table, and the hall had not seen such a gathering for many a year.
I love that. And, I love it
such
even...
a cool...
Isn't it?
Just a great little...
It's a magical little moment.
Play. It is.
It really is, with these animals. And I have
and
to
yet
say
it
that...
doesn't... And yet Tolkien avoids it seeming silly. It seems serious enough. It's delightful.
It does. It is delightful. That's a good way of putting it.
And it's whimsical, but it's not silly at all.
And I love how he talks about the convenience of the wonderful animals that waited on him. Not just the convenience of the animals, but they're wonderful animals.
Yeah.
I love it, but I have to admit there are moments that kind of make me laugh. I mean, I just keep expecting after the ram and the sheep come in, I expect Beorn to turn and say, "That'll do, pig," or something like.
It's funny, but it's not ridiculous.
No, it's not. Though I have to admit, I also had not thought of this in any of the times.
It's not ridiculous as long
book.
as I'm not buying like a sheep.
There you go. I have read this book, I don't know, countless times, and so I've read the line countless times. But until tonight, I never thought about this. That the trays with bowls and platters, knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid on the trestle tables with their opposable thumbs. I mean, how could they do that? How could they grab
That's a good point. Yeah.
utensils? I don't know. They just kind of scoop them up in their arms.
It's like, they can carry things with their forefeet, but there's nothing there about them having thumbs on them. So they're just like holding them together.
I know I hate to bring reality into things, but anyway, that was it just made me laugh. But it is a beautiful moment. I love it. And that even his chair is super low. I mean, here's a guy with we talked about 4 foot long
really long legs.
And he's sitting on something that keeps him really low to the ground. So he can play footsie with the person at the opposite end of the table. Creepy.
Which I'm sure Thorin loved.
Yeah, I know. Thorin's like, "Is that you, Balin?" And Beorn's 8 feet away winking at him. "No, it's me."
Oh, man.
So, Beorn at this dinner, I love this. I love the next line. We didn't read it, but I'm going to read it anyway. They had a supper or a dinner, such as they had not had since they left the last homely house in the West. Mm-hmm. Of course they haven't. It's not like the goblins fed them.
It's true.
But it is a pretty cool moment.
Well, there's a clear parallel between these two moments. And,
exactly. That's the point. I think that's why this is specifically mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's really, if Elrond's house is the last civilization, this is sort of the last domesticated in any. I mean, this is the last anything before it becomes ultimately wild.
Just wild.
This is the wild, but it's a toned down wild. It's a wild that still has hospitality.
It's a little bit of civilization in the wild.
It is, yeah. It's a
little bit of hospitality in the wild.
Just like the last homely house is, but in a stronger way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last homely house, it is, its name kind of tells you what it is. It is the last homely house.
It is the last.
West of the Misty
Mountains. Or the first if you're going the other direction.
Or the first if you're going the other way, yeah. But it clearly is part of that civilized world. Yeah. Whereas Beorn's is kind of like, it's like an outpost in uncivilized territory.
You're right.
So there's a difference there.
There is. There's a lot. I wish we had more time to compare those two, but there's not a whole lot more, but there is some. Beorn talks to them about more about the wild and about Mirkwood. But then as the dwarves listen,
that's a really good point. I'm sorry. Go
ahead.
Quick. But that's another parallel to Rivendell. Remember, in Rivendell, they got not only a good meal, but they also got good information.
Wisdom. That's exactly
right.
Here
they're getting that from
getting
Beorn.
knowledge.
I just thought of that.
And you know what? We're going to go ahead. I'm going to read the last little bit here of our passage for tonight, and then we'll briefly comment before we move on. When dinner was over, they, the dwarves, began to tell tales of their own, but Beorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke most of gold and silver and jewels and the making of things by smithcraft, and Beorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things of gold or silver in his hall, and few save the knives were made of metal at all. They sat long at the table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and the torches were put out. And still they sat in the light of the dancing flames, with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, and dark at the top like trees of the forest. Whether it was magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he heard a sound like wind in the branches, stirring in the rafters, and the hoot of owls. Soon he began to nod with sleep, and the voices seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked and slammed. Beorn was gone. And there you go. It's the end of tonight's reading. We'll do the rest in the next chapter, but some stuff to talk about here.
Yeah. Well, there's the thing I was thinking of about him not really connecting with the dwarves.
He just doesn't. They have a very different value system. The things that are important to dwarves just not important to Beorn at all. But it is interesting. The dwarves do just like they did when they got to Bilbo's house. They talk all night. I mean, they just go on with their tales. That's who they are. They are a people.
They get excited about this kind of talk.
They do. They really
just enjoy
do.
It. They can do it all night.
Yeah, and then of course Beorn. I just thought it was interesting to see. He's a great storyteller, not a great listener. I mean, he just does not want to hear this, and he falls asleep, and then boom, or I'm sorry, he doesn't fall asleep. He seemed to grow drowsy, and then the next thing you know, he's gone.
Doesn't some of this echo Tom Bombadil a little bit? I can't remember.
A little bit.
I don't remember it because I didn't go back and reread the Tom Bombadil chapter, but just the way Tom Bombadil just did not have a care about anything going on beyond the borders of his land. Yeah. I can't remember for sure if he fell asleep or not, but
that's a good question. I don't remember, but there are definitely some similar kind of some parallels, and that's not a surprise. They're both enigmas.
They're both these enigmas,
mysteries.
And they're both these kind of primal characters, these kind of forces of nature.
That's a good way of putting it. You're right.
And Beorn is a man. We know he's a man, but he's sort of a force of nature in his way.
Oh, he most certainly is. So we'll get to the Dwarven Song and the rest of the chapter in the next episode. But
That's
for
gonna be
now, you know what? Heads up. I was about to say join us next time, but don't think that means we're done dishing out the good stuff. I'm just going to say stick around. Most of you do, but iTunes has released some data that we finally get to see, like how long people listen and when they tune out. And when I used to say join us next time, there's always a little dip. Don't do that. Don't be that guy.
Keep listening.
Stick around.
We got some good stuff,
Yeah, I mean, we've got really, really fun information, fun questions, good stuff to talk about, so stick around. But in the meantime, that was a really fun discussion. So, folks, be sure to join us again next time when we wrap up this chapter and Bilbo and the dwarves say goodbye to an old friend, or at least say, see you later.
Yep, exactly. And again, don't you say goodbye just yet, because one of the things we've got coming up is a lot of good stuff in Barliman's bag.
We most certainly do. Not to mention our classic episode-ending bad jokes. I hope people haven't been missing out on those. We've been putting a lot of effort into that. But
yeah, we have.
Before we get to all of that,
a few seconds on each one.
We do a few. That's right. We spend hours slaving away, writing dozens and dozens of jokes per episode. Yeah. We've hired a room full of writers. No.
Wow.
No.
That's just that just makes us sound. That just makes us look worse.
It does. I know, doesn't it?
With a room full of writers.
I know, that's terrible. No, we have not hired any writers. In case that's not painfully obvious that we've not. So I hope people haven't been missing out on those jokes. But before we get to that, we want to take a minute to ask you, please, think about joining our Patreon family at patreon.com/prancingponypod. If we've earned your support. Look, I don't want to sound like a broken record. I really don't. And I know we talk about this every week, but hey, there's a reason. You all know that Sean and I sink several hours into every episode, and we are really happy to do it. But man, the resources you provide really help us make the show better, and it's what's helped us be able to make this move to weekly. So, we thank those of you who are a part of our Patreon family, and we ask the rest of you to just consider it if you can. We do have another big goal to reach. We'd love to be able to go to a moot live and record an episode from there, and maybe even share it live if we can figure out the technology, but certainly record an episode from there and air it as quickly as possible so that you guys can be at conferences and moots that you can't attend. You'll be able to be there through our show. So we want that, but that's going to need a little bit more of your help from Patreon. So to make all of that worth your while, we have some really cool rewards like exclusive content.
Exclusive content like postscripts to each episode.
Oh, those are
I know
fun.
You've heard us talk about these, and maybe some of you have seen our conversations on social media when each episode comes out. Every once in a while, somebody will reference something that happened in a postscript. What those are is basically we record these episodes a couple of weeks in advance. I think everybody knows that by now. And then we actually listen to them before they release, see if there are any jokes that we missed, any mistakes that we want to correct, or topics that we wish we'd done a little more research on. We put those into
There's
a
lot of those sometimes.
There are tons of those. And we put those into to a short, 10 or so minute postscript that's available to our Patreon supporters.
And that postscript usually releases the same day as the episode it follows. So if you want access, in other words, you listen to the episode and then boom, 2 hours later,
go straight to the
there's
postscript.
the postscript.
Yep.
So if you want access to those bonuses, be sure to join the Fellowship of the Podcast. We also do want to take a moment to thank those of you who joined. Like we said, you are helping to make this show really even better. And we definitely want to include a very special shout out to Jason in British Columbia, our patron at the Kierdance contribution tier. Folks, if you want a personalized shout out as one of your rewards, well, it's there. You know where to go.
That's right. And while your support is really appreciated, and we absolutely appreciate your support, but we don't want you to feel obligated.
No.
Only if you can afford it, and only if you think we've earned it, do we want you to consider signing up for the Fellowship of the Podcast. Otherwise, just keep listening to the free podcast. We'll keep making it.
Absolutely. We really will. And we know there are folks who can't, and we totally get it. Please don't.
That's right. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, Sean, why don't we go ahead and get on with Barlowman's Bag, since we did tell folks we would.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Today, I'd like to start with a comment, not a question, and this comes to us from Daniel in Houston. Daniel wrote to us on Facebook after listening to episode 64, and he said, "If you believe MacGyver, pine cones do explode when on fire. I like that, because the exploding pine cones are another example of Gandalf being that kind of wizard. His benefit to the party is primarily in the wisdom that he provides, not in doing the mundanely impossible. He may have added a little magic juice to the pine cones, though."
Well, yeah, green, red, blue, and yeah.
Yeah, and this is, of course, the comment that I was alluding to a little earlier when we talked about just the knowledge that Gandalf has and all that he does for the party, just that wisdom that he brings. Really good points there. I wanted to give Daniel a shout-out for giving us a little scientific knowledge about pine cones. Not to mention a reminder to go back and catch up on some old MacGyver episodes.
Oh, yeah, you're not
man,
kidding.
It's been forever since I've seen that show.
Yeah.
I have to see if it's on Netflix. I don't know. But of course, by now, we have talked more about the pine cones in episode 65. We know that there was definitely some magic in those old pine grenades, right?
The uncanny fire. By the way, you can watch classic MacGyver not on Netflix, as far as I can tell, but on the CBS streaming service, Hulu, or if you're an Amazon Prime member, all 7 seasons are there.
Oh, I love that you actually went and looked for that.
Amazon Prime.
Watch them on Amazon Prime. There you go.
There you go.
But yeah, so also a good reminder that, not counting his fire elemental magic, which really comes from his ring.
Yeah.
Gandalf really is not that kind of wizard. He's not a magician. He's a wizard in the sense of somebody who is wise. And so it is, as Daniel says, it's his knowledge of Pinecone's explosive potential that really saves the party there. So awesome perspective on that, Daniel, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Another listener we haven't heard from in a while, Tarek in Chicago, wrote in some time ago with a question about the First Age, but it fits well with this chapter, so we brought it up. He says, elves weren't vegetarians in general, but what about the Lyquendi, the green elves of Ossirian? Remember that when men first came to Beleriand, the green elves met them first and complained to Finrod, saying they were hewers of trees and hunters of beasts. It seems they simply didn't want non-elven folk in their woods and used the excuse of meat-eaters and tree hewers to justify their appeal to Finrod of having the men removed to a different location. Would they have reacted similarly to other elves living there and doing the same? I wonder if they were just looking for an excuse to get those bearded weird folk out of there.
Great question, Tarek. I love that. Yeah. And for those who didn't hear this discussion many episodes ago, we did talk back in our Beorn and Luthien episodes in Season 1 that most elves were not vegetarians. And long story as to how we landed there, but long story short, a lot of elves hunted, including Finrod himself. And I certainly don't think elves would kill for sport. So if they were hunting, they must have been eating. And also, it was just specifically mentioned that Beorn was a vegetarian. It said that in the Silmarillion. Yep. So it couldn't have been a very common thing in the First Age.
No, it was called out specifically, right?
Right, exactly. It's similar to the way we know Beorn is a vegetarian because the narrator tells us. It would have been an uncommon enough thing in Tolkien's time that I think he would call attention to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, we're never told that the green elves don't hunt or don't eat meat. I would assume that they do, just like the rest. It could be that they were unhappy because of the way men were hunting beasts and cutting down trees. Maybe it's not so much that they were doing it, but that they were doing it irresponsibly and taking the green elves' own game and timber.
I think that's exactly what it is. And I think Tarek is also probably onto something with the idea that this may have just been kind of an excuse.
Yeah.
When we talk about Tolkien, we talk about some of the things he does well. And this is us and everybody, I think, who talks about Tolkien. We may talk about the way he uses language or his knowledge of myth or his love of the past or, his morality. One thing that I think we don't talk about that much is his keen understanding of human nature.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Tolkien knew very well the way people often find reasons to justify opinions that they have that are really just prejudices.
Right.
And as great as the elves are, they really are not morally any more perfect than men are.
No.
We know that many of them had prejudices against dwarves and against men.
The stunted folk.
The stunted folk, and what are some of the things they called men? The sickly.
Oh, man. The sickly.
The latecomers and all, all that stuff.
Man.
So
Friends
I
like
think,
that, who needs enemies, huh?
Right. And I mean, come on, the dwarves, man. Some of the dwarves got hunted down,
Yeah, the petty dwarves, yeah.
So it could be that elves were just, the green elves were just unhappy with men being in their lands because, as Tark brilliantly puts it, they were just bearded weird folk. They're hairy. They speak this weird, ugly-sounding language. They probably stink. So they're unhappy these people are there, and they're probably just coming up with any reason they can to justify it. That strikes me as a human flaw, a very human thing to do, and I think Tolkien has always written his elves as having human flaws.
And particularly those who are more Equendi. I mean, the green elves, they may not be Avari. I mean, they are a branch of the Teleri who never completed the journey, but they're certainly more Equendi, and those, it seems, are often seen as more flawed.
That's true.
Then again, Feanor. Anyway, I agree that it seems...
There's always that. There's always Feanor.
that. There's always that.
Yeah.
We'll always have Feanor.
And the award for most flawed elf in the Silmarillion goes to...
Yeah, that's a pretty obvious one. I agree. It seems more likely that they're upset that the men are hunters of beasts because that means competition for game, rather than being upset because, oh, the poor lovely beasts are being hunted. So that was my best green elf imitation.
That was... My slender bow.
My slender bow. There you go. I love that. That's awesome. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that was a great one. Thank you for that one, Tarek. And I think we've got one more here. We'll end on this one. It's just fun. I like this one a lot. Paul D. in Bristol in the UK wrote in to ask us about music. He said, I would be interested to hear your comments on the music associated with the Legendarium. I'm not thinking of Howard Shore necessarily. I'm thinking more along the lines of Rick Wakeman and his Songs of Middle-earth, or Leonard Nimoy, The Legend of Bilbo Baggins. May I also recommend Treebeard's song by Christopher Lee? Yes, that Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
There are many more, too. Oh, the Internet is a wonderful thing.
It's also
Well
a
said,
terrible
Paul.
thing, but yes.
That is true.
Wonderful and terrible.
Such a great question, Paul. And, man, where to begin with this one? I am not the biggest fan of Leonard Nimoy's Legend of Bilbo Baggins. I got to be honest. That one's just a little too quirky, even for me.
Everybody should watch it once, but only
You got to
once.
watch the video once if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
With the go-go dancing,
Oh, man.
backup
comedy
ladies and stuff.
Genius, really.
After listening to Christopher Lee's Treebeard song, I had not actually heard it until Paul told me about it. But after listening to it, I love it, especially because he actually takes Tolkien's own words from Treebeard's poem and sets it to music. I don't like it quite as much as Christopher Lee's heavy metal album about Charlemagne, but that's just me.
Woo.
And if you haven't listened to that one, you should.
Yeah, that's true.
Rick Wakeman's Songs of Middle-earth, I have heard that one because I do listen to a little bit of Yes every now and again.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I listen to a little bit of Rick Wakeman. And another one that I've heard of is by another former member of Yes, John Anderson, put together a group of musicians called The Fellowship, and they recorded an album called In Elven Lands.
Oh,
and
wow.
that album has, believe it or not one, but two songs about Eärendil on it.
Oh, well.
So I'm sure you can imagine how I feel about that
So
album.
you have it on vinyl, cassette, and CD, and yeah.
Well, no,
Have a
I
signed
don't.
copy.
I'm not that hardcore about it, but I do have it in heavy rotation on Amazon Music.
I'm sure you do. Well, the first thing I have to say is I have to side with you on Nimoy's foray into music. He was an absolutely brilliant Mr. Spock, but don't quit your day job, Leonard. I just, no. But still, I will say this. It speaks very highly of him that he was brave enough to release it, really. I mean, I have to say, wow. Congrats, dude.
That's true.
And I would definitely want to talk to him about it because clearly he must love Tolkien's work to have done that. So,
And that was early. I mean, that was in the 60s. That would have been, it had to have been, one of the earlier things to be released referencing Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, definitely. I have not actually heard Wakeman's work. I'll have to go listen to that. Christopher Lee, on the other hand, I have. I've heard the song that Paul mentioned, plus a few others that he did with the Tolkien Ensemble. They put out, I think, 4 CDs that I'd love to track down that 4 CD set. I've heard a number of cuts off of them, but hard to find the 4 CD collection.
Yeah, I haven't heard all those. I'll have to go look for those. Let me think. I mean, just trying to think of some other ones. I mean, Rush.
Rush, exactly. Rivendell.
I'm a huge Rush fan. Rivendell's not my favorite song of theirs, and it's not really one of my favorite Tolkien songs, but it's cool. I like it. I love that album, so I listen to it a fair bit. I guess people talk about Led Zeppelin a lot, all their Tolkien-inspired lyrics.
Yeah, they have some Tolkien. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the most savvy Zeppelin fan. That probably would be one or two of my old friends from high school, but
30 or 40 years ago, well, not 40 years ago, but 35 years ago I might have been, but I don't remember much of that.
I was like, my friends were all into Zeppelin. I was more like the Pink Floyd guy, so it was kind of,
Yeah.
But, and there's another one. A lot of people recommend a band called Blind Guardian to us.
Yeah, I've had at least 3 or 4 people mention them.
Yeah, and I had not heard of them before we started doing the podcast, but a lot of people have written to us. They're a German metal band that's done a bunch of songs on Tolkien. I think they did a whole album on the Silmarillion. And it's cool stuff. They've got one album cover that's like, Luthien singing to Morgoth.
Yeah.
Really cool, really cool picture. Definitely hardcore Tolkien references. At my age and with kids, I don't really listen to that much German metal anymore. But
my German metal days are behind me.
Yeah, but it's cool stuff. I mean, it's really good stuff. And on occasion, I'll do.
It seems to be. I mean, I'll admit I'm not a good judge of that genre, so I don't know. But it does seem like it's a pretty good album. And certainly they're passionate about Tolkien's work, so I like that.
Definitely, yeah, and they know their stuff.
But I don't get to listen to much of that. Really, I don't get to listen to much of anything. I work, and when I work, I listen to music, but I can't do it with anything with words. So it's a lot of classical.
See, I'm the same way. Yeah.
And some of the shore score, and the truth is that for me, the shore score, at least for the first trilogy, has really become the music of the books as well.
Yeah, it's hard to top. There's no doubt about it. I mean, some of those themes have just they just get into my head whenever I read the books. And
yeah.
With the exception of, the Rankin Bass, 15 Birds and 5 Fir Trees, which I talked about a little bit last time. I think, Shore has really just captured Middle-earth so well.
Yeah, he really has. Those are some great questions. Wow. I mean, really some great questions. But that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, folks, still don't leave. No. You stay. No, don't hit pause. Don't hit stop.
Don't
stick
touch
around.
that
We've still got a couple important things to say. So wait for the music. When you hear the music fade out, you can go.
There you go.
But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again next time when we wrap up Chapter 7 of The Hobbit.
And in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd really love it. Those reviews get us a little bit more visibility in iTunes, and that just translates to a lot more people finding us, and that just grows our Tolkien community.
That's the hope. And thanks to those of you who have, by the way. We do still read every single one of them, including not just iTunes, but the ones we find on Facebook and Stitcher and a few others where there are a handful. We do read them all, and we really do appreciate all the nice things you say about us.
In fact, we appreciate them so much that we've actually started picking out one special review every week to feature on our social media networks. It's just a little way of saying thank you.
Thankful Thursdays.
That's right, Thankful Thursdays. So if you'd like to see your name, or at least your alias, in lights on our pages.
Please keep them clean. Please keep those aliases clean.
Yeah. We haven't had to clean any up yet.
No, we haven't yet. No.
But if you want to see your name in lights on our pages, now it's easy. All you have to do is leave us a review.
Yep.
And also, make sure you never miss an episode of the Prancing Pony podcast by subscribing to us through iTunes or through your favorite podcast app. You can find us in most any podcast directory, and check us out in the podcast app in iOS 11, as it supports our new season and episode tags.
And we're also on Potable now as a new platform. It's a platform that helps you discover new podcasts by finding new and emerging creators and recommending them to you. Kind of like the Netflix algorithms, really. A lot of other apps will make you sort through clunky charts to find your new favorite podcasts. Potable learns your interests and recommends new shows and episodes. Both, in other words, not just the entire show. Let's say there's one episode on a show where they talked about Tolkien, for instance. That'll be recommended to you if you follow us on Potable. So it's a great way to discover new shows and episodes, popular shows and undiscovered shows for that matter. So you can spend less time searching and more time listening.
And we want to thank everyone who's become a part of our social media family. As we always say, we set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone could join. That's why we have the online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast and on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or top 10 names you should never call a huge bearded man who can turn into a bear to Barliman at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Anything except Sir, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. All but Sir and, yeah. To Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. That is our new email address this season. Be sure to take note, barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Oh my goodness, an hour 50 is still far too short a time to spend amongst such excellent and admirable listeners, and it's too long of a time for our weekly episodes. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.